She wore boots to protect herself. They saw it as rebellion. So they put her on the block. But someone in the crowd wasn't laughing. The stagecoach wheezed to a stop in front of the Dry Valley General Store, kicking up a cloud of red dust that settled on everything like a shroud. Clara May Thornton stepped down, her worn leather boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thud that seemed to echo in the afternoon silence. 24 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. She clutched a wooden box to her chest and surveyed the town that was supposed to be her new beginning. Wyoming territory stretched endlessly around her, a landscape of sagebrush and distant mountains that made New Orleans seem like a dream from another life. The weight of her mother's death still pressed on her shoulders, 3 months fresh and raw as an open wound. In the box were her mother's few treasures, a cameo brooch, letters tied with faded ribbon, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Everything else had been sold to pay for the journey west. "This all your belongings, Miss?" The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Hank, hauled down her single carpet bag from the roof. "Yes, sir. Thank you kindly." Clara's Louisiana accent softened the words, marking her immediately as an outsider in this rough frontier town. She'd answered an advertisement in the Times-Picayune, respectable women needed for employment in growing western territories, good wages and lodging provided. It had seemed like Providence at the time, a chance to start fresh where nobody knew her story, where nobody whispered about her mother's final days in the charity ward, or how Clara had worn men's work boots to trudge through the muddy streets doing laundry for pennies. The main street of Dry Valley stretched before her, a collection of sun-bleached buildings that looked like they'd been dropped carelessly onto the prairie. The Palace Saloon dominated one side, its painted sign featuring a scantily clad woman that would have scandalized her mother. Across from it stood Murphy's General Store, the bank, and at the far end, Rosalie's boarding house and eatery. Clara straightened her shoulders and walked toward the eatery, conscious of every eye that followed her progress. Her dress was clean but faded, a practical brown cotton that had seen better days. But it was her boots that drew stares tall, sturdy men's boots that peeked out beneath her hem with each step. She'd bought them second-hand in St. Louis when her ladies' shoes had fallen apart, and they'd served her well on the journey. The bell above Rosalie's door chimed as Clara entered. The dining room was simple but clean, with red-checked tablecloths and the smell of beef stew hanging heavy in the air. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair and sharp eyes that took in every detail of Clara's appearance. "Help you?" The woman's tone was neither welcoming nor hostile, merely cautious. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Clara Thornton. I've come about the employment advertisement." Clara set down her box and bag, pulling the carefully folded newspaper clipping from her pocket. The woman, Rosalie, Clara assumed took the paper and examined it with a frown. "This is near 6 months old. That position's long filled." Clara's heart sank. She'd spent everything on the journey, believing she had work waiting. "I see. Perhaps, might you know of other employment in town? I'm a hard worker. Ma'am, I can cook, clean, mend." "Wearing those—" Rosalie's gaze dropped pointedly to Clara's boots. "Ladies in Dry Valley don't wear men's boots. Miss Thornton sets a poor example." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "With respect, ma'am, these boots are practical. They're sturdy and—" "They're improper." A new voice cut through the conversation. Clara turned to see a woman entering from the street, dressed in crisp blue calico with a matching bonnet. Everything about her screamed respectability, from her kid gloves to her polished lady's boots. "Rosalie, who is this person?" "Claims she's here about that old advertisement. Mrs. Morrison." "Mrs.?" Morrison's lips pursed as she examined Clara like a specimen under glass. As the mayor's wife, her disapproval carried weight in Dry Valley. "From New Orleans. By your speech, we've no need for that sort here. This is a respectable town. Miss Thornton, Clara Thornton, and I assure you, I'm quite respectable. Respectable women don't gallivant about in men's footwear. Mrs. Morrison's voice dripped condescension. It suggests a certain masculine tendency that we cannot tolerate. What's next? Trousers voting. Several other women had entered the eatery, drawn by the prospect of gossip. Clara recognized the dynamic immediately. She was to be today's entertainment, the outsider to be picked apart for sport. I need work, Clara said simply. These boots protect my feet and allow me to work harder. Surely that's more important than maintaining proper standards. Mrs. Morrison's voice rose. My dear girl, you clearly don't understand how things are done here. Dry Valley prides itself on moral rectitude. We've worked hard to build a civilized community in this wilderness. One of the other women, younger with nervous eyes, whispered to her companion. Did you see how she walked bold as brass, like a man? Shameless, the companion agreed. Clara felt the familiar burn of injustice in her chest. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Hold your head high, Clara May, never let them see you buckle. But she needed work, needed food and shelter. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Please, she said, addressing Rosalie. Just a chance. I'll work for half wages to start. I'll sleep in the storeroom if need be. Rosalie wavered. Clara could see it in her eyes. But then Mrs. Morrison spoke again. Rosalie, surely you won't encourage this display. What will people say? What example does it set for our daughters? The room filled with murmurs of agreement. Clara stood surrounded by a sea of disapproving faces, women who'd never known a day of true hardship, who'd never had to choose between dignity and survival. Her boots had carried her through her mother's illness, through countless miles of desperate job-seeking, through the mud and muck of a life that didn't allow for delicate sensibilities. I believe, Clara said, her voice cutting through the chatter, that a woman's worth isn't measured by her footwear but by her character. These boots have walked through sorrow and hardship. They've stood in charity ward halls and beside my mother's deathbed. They're honest boots, work boots. And if that offends you, then perhaps it's your character that needs examining, not mine. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Morrison's face flushed red as a beet. How dare you? I dare because I have nothing left to lose. Clara interrupted. You've already decided I'm unfit for your town. So be it. But don't dress your prejudice up as righteousness. She gathered her belonging, spine straight despite the trembling in her hands. As she reached the door, Rosalie called out, Wait! The older woman looked conflicted, glancing between Clara and Mrs. Morrison. There might be. That is, Tom Hennessy needs help at the livery stable. It's not women's work, but... The livery stable, Mrs. Morrison was aghast. Rosalie, you cannot be serious. Next you'll suggest she take up blacksmithing. But Clara had already slipped out the door, her boots ringing against the boardwalk as she strode toward the end of town, where the sharp scent of horses and hay promised a different kind of reception. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of scandalized conversation starting up again. By evening, word had spread through Dry Valley like wildfire. The strange woman from New Orleans who wore men's boots and spoke back to the mayor's wife, who'd taken work at the livery stable, of all places, mucking stalls and mending harnesses like a common laborer. Tom Hennessy, a widower more interested in horses than town politics, had hired her on the spot, caring only that she wasn't afraid of hard work. Clara bunked in the small room above the stable, her few possessions arranged carefully in the corner. Through the single window, she could see the lights of the town beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Morrison and her circle were no doubt discussing the scandal of it all, weaving stories about the improper woman who refused to know her place. Let them talk, Clara thought, unlacing her boots with careful hands. These boots had brought her this far. They'd carry her further still, no matter what Dry Valley thought of them. She placed them beside her narrow cot, the leather worn smooth in places, testament to miles of determination. Tomorrow she'd wake before dawn to tend the horses. Tomorrow she'd face more stares and whispers. But tonight, for the first time since her mother's death, Clara May Thornton felt something like hope. It wasn't the new beginning she'd imagined, but it was a beginning nonetheless. And that, she decided, was enough. The October air bit sharp through Clara's worn coat as she made her way across the town square toward the weekly market. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival in Dry Valley. 3 weeks of cold shoulders and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she appeared. But the horses didn't care about her boots, and Tom Hennessy paid fair wages. It was enough to keep body and soul together. The market sprawled across the dusty square, a collection of wagons and temporary stalls where ranchers and farmers from the surrounding territory came to trade. Clara needed flour and coffee, maybe some salt pork if the price was right. She kept her head high as she walked, though she could feel the familiar weight of stares following her progress. "That's her," she heard someone mutter. "The one who thinks she's too good for proper women's shoes." Clara had learned to let the words roll off her like water. She'd survived worse in New Orleans, watching her mother waste away while society ladies clutched their pearls and offered prayers instead of practical help. These boots had stood in soup kitchen lines and charity wards. They could certainly withstand the disapproval of Dry Valley. She was examining a sack of flour, calculating if she could make it stretch 2 weeks, when Mrs. Morrison's voice rang out across the square. "Ladies, may I have your attention, please?" Clara's stomach clenched. Nothing good ever came from Mrs. Morrison seeking public attention. The mayor's wife stood on a makeshift platform near the center of the square, surrounded by her usual coterie of followers. She wore a new dress, Clara noticed, deep purple wool that must have cost more than Clara earned in a month. "As you all know," Mrs. Morrison continued, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air, "our town has always prided itself on maintaining proper Christian values and social standards. It has come to my attention that certain influences have infiltrated our community, influences that threaten the very fabric of our society." Several heads turned toward Clara. She stood frozen, the sack of flour still in her hands. "Therefore," Mrs. Morrison went on, "the Ladies' Moral Improvement Society has decided to hold a special charity auction. All proceeds will go toward bringing a proper schoolmarm to Dry Valley, someone who can set an appropriate example for our young ladies." Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered crowd. Clara saw Rosalie standing near her eatery stall, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. "However," Mrs. Morrison's smile turned sharp as a blade, "we must first address the negative influence in our midst, Miss Thornton." Every eye in the square turned to Clara. She set down the flour slowly, her mind racing. "Since you seem so eager to conduct yourself like a man, perhaps you'd enjoy participating in our auction like one. Gentlemen often donate an evening of their time for charity dinner with the highest bidder. Perfectly respectable. Surely someone who wears men's boots wouldn't object to such an arrangement." The trap was perfectly laid. If Clara refused, she'd be seen as too proud to help bring education to Dry Valley's children. If she agreed, she'd be publicly humiliated, paraded like livestock for the amusement of the crowd. "I hardly think," Clara began. "Oh, but I insist," Mrs. Morrison's voice dripped false sweetness. "Unless, of course, you admit that there are differences between proper ladies and whatever it is you're trying to be." The crowd pressed closer, eager for the spectacle. Clara saw Tom Hennessy at the edge, his weathered face creased with concern. But he was one man against the tide of public opinion. "What exactly are you proposing?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Simple, you'll stand on this platform, and gentlemen will bid for the pleasure of your company for an evening. All very proper. Chaperoned, of course. Think of it as community service. And if I refuse, Mrs. Morrison's smile widened. Well, I suppose that would show everyone exactly what kind of woman wears men's boots. The kind who doesn't care about helping children. The kind who puts her own pride above the community good. It was masterfully done. Clara had to admire the manipulation even as it trapped her. Around the square, she could see the eager faces, the anticipation of her humiliation. These people who attended church every Sunday and spoke of Christian charity were salivating at the prospect of watching her be brought low. Very well, Clara said, lifting her chin. For the children's education. The crowd parted as she walked toward the platform. Each step felt like walking to a gallows, but she kept her shoulders straight, her stride steady. Her boots rang against the wooden planks as she climbed the steps. "Gentlemen, Mrs." Morrison called out, barely containing her glee. "What am I bid for an evening with Miss Thornton, remember? It's for charity." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came a snicker. "2 bits," someone called out. "That's about what them boots are worth." Laughter rippled through the square. Clara stood motionless, feeling the burn of humiliation but refusing to let it show. 50 cents, another voice. More laughter. $1? This from a drunk cowhand who swayed on his feet. Always wondered what kind of woman wears breeches boots. Mrs. Morrison was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Come now, gentlemen. Surely someone wants to spend an evening with our unique visitor. $1.50. $2. The bids were insults, each one accompanied by laughter and crude comments. Clara stared straight ahead, focusing on a point in the distance, trying to rise above the moment even as it threatened to drown her. Then, cutting through the noise like a knife through butter, came a voice that silenced the entire square. $100, 1 night on my land. The crowd turned as one. Searching for the source of the bid, Clara's gaze found him at the same moment everyone else did, a man standing at the very back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. As he moved into the light, Clara got her first clear look at Jesse McRae. Dust covered his long duster coat, and his face bore the weathered look of a man who spent more time under open sky than roof. Dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and his eyes Clara had never seen eyes quite that shade, gray-green like sage after rain. "Did you say $100, Mrs.?" Morrison's voice had lost its commanding tone. "I did." Jesse's voice was deep, measured. He reached the platform and pulled a leather wallet from his coat. "Cash money. Though I have to say, Mrs. Morrison, this is a peculiar kind of charity. It's perfectly respectable." "Is it?" Jesse counted out bills with deliberate movements. "Seems to me like you're selling a woman's dignity for entertainment. Don't recall reading about that in the Bible." "Mrs. Morrison's face flushed. "Mr. McRae, you misunderstand." "I understand plenty." He folded the bills and held them out. $100, by your own rules. That makes me the winner, unless someone wants to bid higher. The square was silent as a grave. No one met Jesse's eyes as he scanned the crowd. Thought not. He turned to Clara then, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me." Clara found herself looking into those storm-colored eyes, seeing something there she hadn't expected: respect. Not pity, not amusement, but the simple acknowledgement of one human being to another. She stepped down from the platform, and Jesse offered his arm. She took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the dusty coat. Together they walked through the crowd, which parted silently before them. Clara could feel the shock radiating from the townspeople. Their entertainment turned into something else entirely. "My wagon's just outside town," Jesse said quietly as they cleared the square. "You don't have to come if you don't want. I'll take you wherever you need to go." You just paid $100, Clara said, finding her voice at last. I paid $100 to end that shameful display, he corrected. Your time's your own, Miss Thornton, Clara Thornton. Jesse McRae. He touched the brim of his hat. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north. You're welcome to stay there tonight, or I can take you back to wherever you're lodging. Your choice. Clara glanced back at the square, where the crowd was dispersing in confused clusters. Mrs. Morrison stood on her platform, mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The victory she'd sought had turned to ash. I work at Hennessy's livery, Clara said, but I think I'd like to see your ranch. Mr. McRae. Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It's nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. As he helped her onto the wagon seat, Clara caught sight of her boots dusty, worn, practical. They'd carried her to this strange moment, where a man she'd never met had paid a fortune to preserve her dignity. She didn't understand it yet, but for the first time since arriving in Dry Valley, she felt like she could breathe. Jesse climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled away from town, Clara heard Mrs. Morrison's voice rising shrilly behind them, trying to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. The auction was over, and Clara had somehow emerged with her pride intact. Thank you, she said quietly. Jesse glanced at her, then back at the road ahead. No woman should be made a spectacle of, especially not for wearing sensible shoes. Despite everything, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are fools, Jesse said simply, and flicked the reins to urge the horses faster, carrying them away from the town and toward whatever came next. The wagon rolled north along a rutted track, leaving Dry Valley behind in a haze of dust and bitter memory. Clara sat rigid on the wooden seat, acutely aware of the man beside her, this stranger who had just paid more money than she'd see in a year for the dubious privilege of her company. Jesse McRae handled the reins with easy competence, his presence solid and strangely calming despite the circumstances. Neither spoke for the first mile. Clara's mind raced with questions and concerns. What kind of man paid such a sum? What did he expect in return? Her hand drifted unconsciously to the small knife she kept in her boot, a habit learned in the harder quarters of New Orleans. You can relax, Miss Thornton, Jesse said without looking at her. I meant what I said. You're not obligated to anything. Men don't usually part with $100 for nothing, Clara replied, her voice carefully neutral. True enough. He glanced at her then, those storm-gray eyes unreadable. But I've got my reasons, and they're not what you're thinking. The landscape opened up around them as they left the town behind. Rolling hills dotted with sage and juniper stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks already touched with early snow. The sky seemed impossibly vast after the cramped quarters above the livery stable. I knew your mother, Jesse said suddenly. Clara's head whipped around. What? Lillian Thornton. She played piano at the Riverside Hotel in St. Louis. Must have been 15 years ago. I was driving cattle through, young and foolish. Spent most of my pay listening to her play. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. She had a way of making that old piano sound like it was worth something. Clara's throat tightened. She never mentioned... Wouldn't expect her to. I was just another dusty cowhand passing through, but she was kind to a lonely boy far from home. Gave me good advice when I was thinking of doing something stupid. He paused. When I heard the name Thornton and that accent of yours, I wondered. Then I saw your eyes, same as hers. The revelation left Clara speechless. Of all the possibilities she'd imagined, this connection to her past wasn't among them. Is that why you... Partly. Jesse's jaw tightened. But mostly because what they were doing was wrong. I've seen men auction off horses with more dignity than they showed you. They rode in silence for a while, Clara processing this unexpected link to her mother. Lillian had never spoken much of her time in St. Louis, the years before she'd met Clara's father. Now, a piece of that past sat beside her, driving a wagon through Wyoming territory. "There's my place," Jessie said eventually, nodding toward a collection of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. Clara had expected something rough, perhaps a crude cabin and a few corrals. Instead, she saw a well-built house with a proper porch, several sturdy outbuildings, and fenced pastures where horses grazed. It spoke of hard work and careful planning, a man building something meant to last. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. "It's home." Jessie guided the wagon into the yard. "Been working this land for 7 years now. Run horses mostly, some cattle, do my own breaking and training." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong but careful. Clara noticed several horses in the nearest corral watching their arrival with intelligent eyes. One, a paint mare with distinctive markings, nickered softly. "That's Buttercup," Jessie said, noting her interest. "Despite the name, she's got more spirit than any 3 horses combined. Dumped me in a creek the first time I tried to ride her." "But you kept trying." "Sometimes the difficult ones are worth the extra effort." He wasn't looking at the horses when he said it. Jessie led her to the house, opening the door to reveal a clean, simply furnished interior. Everything was practical but well-maintained: a stone fireplace, a wooden table and chairs, shelves lined with books that surprised her. "You read?" she asked, examining the spines. "Shakespeare, Emerson, even some Jane Austen. Long winters out here. Man needs something to occupy his mind." He seemed almost embarrassed by her interest. "Are you hungry? I've got stew on the stove." They ate in companionable silence, the simple meal more satisfying than anything Clara had managed on her meager wages. As darkness fell beyond the windows, the reality of the situation began to settle on her shoulders. "About tonight," she began. "You'll take the bedroom," Jessie said firmly. "I'll bunk in the barn. Done it plenty of times when I have horses that need watching." "I couldn't." "You could and you will." His tone brooked no argument. "No woman sleeps in a barn on my land while there's a proper bed available." Clara studied him across the table. This contradiction of a man, rough-hewn but well-read, solitary but kind. "Why don't you have a wife, Mr. McRae? Surely there are women who'd be pleased to share all this." Something shuddered in his expression. "Had someone once. She decided city life suited her better than ranching. Taught me I'm better off alone." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Some lessons are worth learning, even if they sting." He stood, beginning to clear the dishes. "I'll show you where things are." He gave her a brief tour of the bedroom with its quilted coverlet, fresh water in the pitcher, clean towels. Everything spoke of a man who took care with details, who valued order and cleanliness even in isolation. "There's a bolt on the door," he said quietly. "Use it if it makes you feel safer." "You're not what I expected," Clara admitted. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something else. Someone else." She met his eyes. "I still don't understand why you did it. The auction." Jessie leaned against the doorframe, seeming to consider his words carefully. "You know what I saw when I walked into that square? A wolf pack circling something they thought was weak. Mrs. Morrison and her cronies, thinking they had the right to humble you because you don't fit their narrow idea of proper." He paused, his gaze distant. "I've seen it before. My mother was Scots-Irish, came over during the potato famine, worked as a seamstress, supported 3 kids after my father died. Town ladies looked at her the same way they looked at you, like she was less than human because she had calluses on her hands and spoke with an accent." "What happened to her?" "She outlived most of them." A slight smile touched his lips. "Tough as boot leather. My mother taught me to judge people by their actions, not their circumstances." Clara felt something ease in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. "And my actions." Standing on that platform with your head high while those vultures circled, that took courage. He straightened. I'll get your things from the wagon. Later, alone in the bedroom with the door bolted as promised, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots. The same boots that had caused such scandal, that had marked her as different, unacceptable. She ran her fingers over the worn leather, thinking of Jesse's words. Outside, she could hear him moving in the barn, talking low to the horses. A man of his word, giving her space and safety without question or condition. He'd known her mother, carried that small kindness for 15 years, and acted on it when he saw Lillian's daughter in need. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. For the first time since her mother's death, she didn't feel entirely alone. It was a dangerous feeling. She knew. Tomorrow she'd have to return to town, face the aftermath of today's spectacle. But tonight, in this unexpected sanctuary, she allowed herself to feel grateful. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Miss Thornton, I'm leaving water outside for the morning. Sleep well. She listened to his footsteps fade, then quietly unbolted the door to retrieve the bucket. A folded piece of paper lay beside it. By lamplight, she read Jesse's careful script. Miss Thornton, you're welcome to stay as long as needed. There's work here if you want it. Horses need tending. Garden needs finishing before frost. Room and board. Fair wages, no questions. No obligations. Consider it if town becomes unbearable. J. McRae. Clara folded the note carefully. Something warm blooming in her chest. Jesse McRae, who'd paid a fortune to preserve a stranger's dignity, who slept in a barn to ensure her comfort, who offered sanctuary with no strings attached. She looked again at her boots, standing beside the bed like patient sentinels. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, she was safe, respected, and strangest of all understood. The sound of horses nickering in the distance mixed with the whisper of wind through sage. Clara Thornton, who had arrived in Dry Valley with nothing but hope and determination, found herself in a place she'd never expected. Not just a physical refuge, but something more precious, a space where her worth wasn't measured by her footwear or her conformity, but by the courage Jesse McRae had seen in her. She slept that night without dreams, the bolt undrawn on the door. Dawn came gentle to the McRae ranch, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Clara woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the distant whinny of horses. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back the auction. Jesse's intervention. This unexpected refuge. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch, breathing in air so clean it made her lungs ache. Jesse was already at work in the corral, moving among the horses with an easy grace that spoke of years of practice. He'd traded his duster for a simple work shirt and worn chaps, his hat pushed back as he examined a bay gelding's hoof. Morning, he called without looking up. Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself. Clara found the kitchen already warm, the coffee pot steaming. She poured a cup and wrapped her hands around it, watching through the window as Jesse worked. There was something peaceful about the scene, a rhythm to ranch life that felt as old as the land itself. She'd finished her coffee and was washing the cup when Jesse came in, bringing the scent of horses and morning air with him. Sleep all right? He asked, pouring his own coffee. Better than I have in months. It was true. The bed had been comfortable, but more than that, she'd felt safe. Thank you again for... No need. He cut her off gently. I meant what I wrote in that note. You're welcome here, but I understand if you need to get back to town. Tom Hennessy will be wondering where you are. Clara had been dreading this moment. The thought of returning to Dry Valley, facing the whispers and stares after yesterday's humiliation, made her stomach clench. But she had responsibilities, meager as they were. I should go back, she said reluctantly. My things are there, and Mr. Hennessy has been kind to me. I'll drive you whenever you're ready. Jesse studied her over the rim of his cup. But Clara, may I call you Clara, that offer stands. Work and a place here if you want it. The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know enough. He set down his cup. I know you're not afraid of hard work. I know you've got backbone. And I know what it's like to not fit into other people's expectations. Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. Through the window, she could see a rider coming fast, dust billowing behind them. Jessie frowned. That's Will Garrett, Tom Hennessy's boy. Something's wrong. They met Will in the yard. The boy, no more than 16, was red-faced and breathless. Mr. McRae, Miss Clara, Mr. Hennessy sent me. There's trouble in town. What kind of trouble? Jessie's voice had gone sharp. Mrs. Morrison. Sir, she's saying Miss Clara stole from the charity funds. Says she's got witnesses who saw her near the cash box at the auction. Sheriff's looking to arrest her. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. But I never... We know that. Will interrupted. Mr. Hennessy knows it too, but Mrs. Morrison's got half the town worked up. Says you and Mr. McRae planned the whole thing, that the $100 was really stolen money being passed back. Jessie cursed under his breath, a rare display of temper. That woman's vindictiveness knows no bounds. Mr. Hennessy says not to come back to town. Miss, Will continued, says he'll send your things when he can. Sheriff Daniels is a fair man, but he's got to follow the law. And if Mrs. Morrison files formal charges... She's trying to run me out of the territory, Clara said quietly. This is her revenge for yesterday. Jessie's jaw was tight. Will, you ride back and tell Tom Hennessy that Miss Thornton is under my protection. If Sheriff Daniels wants to talk to her, he can come here. And tell him to bring proof of these accusations, not just Mrs. Morrison's wounded pride. The boy nodded and wheeled his horse around, racing back toward town. Clara stood frozen in the yard, the weight of this new crisis settling on her shoulders. I should go back, she said. Face these lies head on. No. Jessie's voice was firm. That's exactly what she wants. You in a jail cell where she can parade past and gloat. We'll handle this properly, through legal channels. I can't hide here. You're not hiding. You're being strategic. He turned to her, his gray eyes intense. Clara, I've dealt with people like Mrs. Morrison before. They use respectability like a weapon. The only way to fight them is to refuse to play their game. Clara wanted to argue, but the logic of his words was undeniable. In town, she'd be vulnerable to whatever story Mrs. Morrison had concocted. Here, at least, she had breathing room to think. What do you suggest? She asked. First, we send word to Judge Howard in Cheyenne. He rides circuit and will be through in 2 weeks. He's fair and doesn't care for false accusations. Jessie began pacing, thinking aloud. Second, we get affidavits from anyone who was at that auction who can testify you never went near the money box. Who would speak for me? I'm an outsider. Tom Hennessy, for one. Maybe Rosalie, if she's got the courage. And there's me. He stopped pacing. I saw everything that happened at that auction. You never left that platform until I escorted you away. Clara sank onto the porch step, suddenly exhausted. She's going to make my life miserable until I leave. Then don't leave. Jessie sat beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. I meant that offer. Clara, there's good work here, honest work. Let Mrs. Morrison stew in her own bile. But people will talk about me staying here, about us. Let them. His voice carried a quiet defiance. I've been living out here 7 years. Clara, I pay my debts, help my neighbors when needed, and mind my own business. My reputation can weather whatever stories they want to spin. Clara looked at him. This man she'd known less than a day, who was offering more support than she'd received in years. Why do you care what happens to me? Jesse was quiet for a long moment, staring out at his land. Maybe because I remember a boy far from home, scared and alone, and a piano player who took time to talk to him like he mattered. Maybe because I've watched this territory attract good people trying to build something, only to see them driven off by those who think their money or position gives them the right to judge. He stood, offering her his hand. Or maybe because yesterday I saw a woman stand with dignity while wolves circled, and I thought there's someone worth knowing. Clara took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was calloused but gentle, and he held on just a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. "All right," she said. "I'll stay. But I work for my keep. No charity." "Wouldn't dream of it." A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Hope you're not afraid of ornery horses and early mornings." "Some. Mr. McRae. I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life. Horses and hard work aren't among them." He nodded, satisfied. "Then let's get you settled proper. That room you slept in, it's yours for as long as you need it. Was meant for a housekeeper, but I never got around to hiring one. You can help with cooking and housework along with the horses, if that suits." They spent the rest of the morning organizing her new life. Jesse showed her around the property properly, the barn with its well-maintained stalls, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that needed tending before winter. He explained the routine of the ranch, the personalities of different horses, which ones needed extra attention. "This is Sage," he said, introducing her to a gray mare with intelligent eyes. "She's gentle but smart. Good for learning on if you want to improve your riding." "I'd like that," Clara said, stroking the mare's velvet nose. As the day wore on, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of ranch work. There was something healing about working with the animals, about tasks that had clear beginnings and endings. Jesse worked alongside her, patient with her questions, approving when she showed initiative. Late afternoon brought another visitor, Tom Hennessy himself, driving a wagon with Clara's few possessions. "Figured you'd be here," the older man said, climbing down stiffly. "Whole town's in an uproar. Mrs. Morrison's claiming you're a confidence woman from New Orleans, that Jesse here is your accomplice." "And what do you think, Tom?" Jesse asked quietly. "I think Mrs. Morrison's a bitter woman who can't stand being made a fool of." Tom spat tobacco juice into the dust. "I also think Miss Clara here is one of the best workers I've had, and I'm sorry to lose her, but it's not safe in town right now." He handed Clara a small purse. "Your wages, plus a little extra. Least I could do." "Thank you, Mr. Hennessy." Clara was touched by the gesture. "For everything. You need any witnesses for when the judge comes, you let me know." Tom climbed back onto his wagon. "And Jesse, you're doing a good thing here. Don't let anyone tell you different." As the wagon rolled away, Clara stood beside Jesse in the fading light, her few possessions the wooden box of her mother's things, her spare dress. Her Bible seemed pitifully small for a whole life. But she had something now she hadn't had this morning, a place, a purpose, and perhaps even an ally. "Regrets?" Jesse asked. Clara looked down at her boots, dusty from the day's work, then up at the man beside her. "No," she said firmly. "No regrets." That evening, she cooked her first meal in Jesse's kitchen, simple fare, but he ate with apparent appreciation. They talked little, but the silence was comfortable, as stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky. Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death, the possibility of belonging somewhere. "I'll teach you to shoot tomorrow," Jesse said as they cleared the dishes. "Everyone on a ranch should know how to handle a rifle." "All right," Clara smiled slightly. "Though I suspect Mrs. Morrison would have opinions about that too. Mrs. Morrison's opinion stopped mattering the moment you left town." Jesse's voice carried quiet conviction. "Out here, Clara, you can be whoever you need to be." Looking at him across the lamplit kitchen, Clara believed him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new skills to learn, new battles to fight. But tonight, in this simple house on the edge of nowhere, she had found something precious, a place where her worth wasn't measured by her conformity to others' expectations, but by the work of her hands and the strength of her character. The boots that had caused such scandal stood by the door, ready for tomorrow's work. Clara no longer saw them as a symbol of defiance, but as tools practical, necessary, and hers by right, just like the new life she was building, one day at a time, on Jesse McRae's ranch. 2 weeks melted into a month, autumn painting the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and rust. Clara had fallen into the rhythm of ranch life with an ease that surprised her. Morning chores, afternoon rides on Sage, evenings mending harness or helping Jesse with the account books. Her hands, already work-worn, developed new calluses from rope and reins. Her skin took on a healthy glow from days spent under the vast sky. The scandal in town had died to a simmer, though letters from Tom Hennessy kept them informed. Mrs. Morrison had been unable to produce any real evidence of theft, and Sheriff Daniels had declined to pursue the matter. But the damage to Clara's reputation remained, an invisible wall between her and any future in Dry Valley. "You're getting good with that," Jesse observed one afternoon, watching Clara work with a young colt in the round pen. She'd developed a gentle but firm way with the horses, earning their trust through patience rather than force. "He reminds me of some of the children I used to teach Sunday school to in New Orleans," Clara said, guiding the colt through another circuit. "Eager to please once they understand what you're asking." Jesse leaned against the fence rail, his expression thoughtful. "You miss it, city life?" Clara considered the question, one hand stroking the colt's neck. "I miss certain things, the music, the energy, but not the rest of it. Not the pretense, the constant judgment." She met his eyes. "I've never felt more myself than I do here." It was true. Life on the ranch had stripped away the layers of expectation and propriety that had constrained her for so long. Here, her worth was measured in tangible things: a well-trained horse, a properly mended fence, a meal that filled hungry stomachs. Jesse treated her as an equal, valuing her opinions on everything from horse breeding to crop rotation. "There's something I've been meaning to show you," Jesse said, pushing off from the fence. "Got time for a ride?" Clara settled the colt in his stall and saddled Sage, following Jesse out across the northern pasture. They rode in companionable silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and the whisper of wind through dry grass. After about an hour, Jesse led them up a winding trail into the foothills. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, ducking under a low-hanging pine branch. "You'll see." The trail opened suddenly onto a small meadow, and Clara caught her breath. A cabin sat nestled among the pines, smaller than Jesse's house but solidly built. Beside it, a spring bubbled up from the rocks, forming a clear pool before trickling away down the hillside. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Whose is it?" "Mine. Built it my second year here, before I had the main house." Jesse dismounted, helping her down. "Used to come here when I needed to think. Haven't been up in months." They explored the cabin, which was dusty but sound. A simple bed frame, a table, a stone fireplace, windows that looked out over the valley below, where Jesse's ranch spread like a patchwork quilt. "Why did you want to show me this?" Clara asked, running her fingers over the smooth log walls. Jesse stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Because I want you to know you have options. This place could be yours if you wanted. Your own space. Close enough to work the ranch, but far enough for privacy. No one could question the propriety of it." Clara turned to face him, understanding the offer beneath the words. He was giving her independence, a way to silence any remaining gossip while still maintaining their working relationship. It was thoughtful, considerate, and somehow it made her heart ache. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to move up here?" "What I want." Jesse removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. What I want and what's proper aren't always the same thing. Clara. The air between them shifted, charged with unspoken possibilities. Over the past weeks, Clara had become attuned to Jesse's moods, the subtle changes in his expression, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd felt her own awareness growing too, noticing the strength in his hands as he worked, the rare sound of his laughter, the way he always saved the best portion of dinner for her plate. "Maybe," Clara said carefully, "we should stop worrying so much about what's proper. Seems to me that's caused nothing but trouble so far." Jesse stepped into the cabin, closer to her but still maintaining careful distance. "You don't know what people would say. A woman living unmarried on a man's property." "They already say it," Clara interrupted. "According to Tom's letters, half the town thinks I'm your mistress. The other half thinks I'm a criminal in hiding. My reputation is already ruined by their standards. You could start fresh somewhere else. I'd give you money. References." "Jesse!" His name on her lips stopped him mid-sentence. "Do you want me to leave?" The question hung between them like morning mist. Jesse stood very still, his gray eyes searching her face. "No," he said finally, the word rough with honesty. "No, I don't want you to leave." Clara took a step toward him. "Then stop trying to solve problems that don't exist. I'm here because I choose to be, because for the first time in my life, I'm valued for who I am, not who someone thinks I should be." "Clara!" Her name was almost a warning, but she pressed on. "You gave me dignity when others tried to strip it away. You offered me work when no one else would. You treat me as an equal. Trust me with your horses, your home." Another step closer. "Do you really think I care what Mrs. Morrison and her cronies say about that?" Jesse's hands clenched at his sides, as if physically restraining himself. "You're under my protection. I won't take advantage." "You're not." Clara reached out, placing her hand over his clenched fist. "But Jesse, protection doesn't mean isolation. I'm grateful for all you've done, but I don't need you to make my choices for me." His hand uncurled beneath hers, fingers interlacing with gentle pressure. "What do you need?" The question was loaded with possibility. Clara thought of her mother's words, about not letting others cut her down to size. She thought of her worn boots, carrying her from grief to this moment. She thought of mornings in the kitchen, sharing coffee and comfortable silence with this complicated, honorable man. "Time," she said finally. "Time to know you better. Time to understand what this is between us. Time without the weight of other people's expectations." Jesse's thumb traced a small circle on her palm. "I can give you time. And honesty," Clara added. "No more trying to send me away for my own good. Fair enough?" A slight smile tugged at his mouth. "Though you should know I'm out of practice at this, whatever this is." "So am I." Clara squeezed his hand before releasing it. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." They stood there in the dusty cabin, afternoon light slanting through the windows, finding a new equilibrium. Not employer and employee, not protector and protected, but something more complex and infinitely more precious, two people choosing to know each other truly. "We should head back," Jesse said eventually. "Evening chores won't do themselves." "Yes, but Jesse," Clara waited until he looked at her. "Thank you for showing me this place. It's good to know it's here if I need it, but right now, I'm happy where I am." Something flickered in his eyes, relief, perhaps, or hope. "Good, because I'd miss your cooking something fierce." Clara laughed, the sound echoing off the cabin walls. "Just my cooking." "Well," Jesse settled his hat back on his head. A gesture she'd learned meant he was buying time to think. "Maybe your company at dinner, too, and the way you hum when you're working with the horses, and how you put wildflowers on the kitchen table." "Jesse McRae," Clara said, mock serious. "Are you saying you'd miss me?" "I'm saying," he replied, holding the door for her, that this ranch has been a better place since you arrived. Make of that what you will." They rode back as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. Clara felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that had been growing day by day. This land, this life, this man, they weren't what she'd planned when she'd left New Orleans. But maybe that was the point. The best things in life rarely announced themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they came quiet as a Wyoming morning, solid as a hand offered in a moment of need. That evening, as they worked side by side preparing dinner, Clara found herself humming an old hymn her mother used to love. Jesse smiled without commenting, adding his low harmony to the melody. It was a small moment, ordinary in its domesticity, but Clara treasured it, adding it to her growing collection of memories that had nothing to do with scandal or propriety and everything to do with building a life worth living. "I've been thinking," Jesse said as they sat down to eat. "Winter's coming. Might be good to lay in extra supplies. Maybe improve the insulation in your room. Make sure you're comfortable." "Planning for the long term?" Clara asked lightly, though her heart beat faster at the implication. Jesse met her eyes steadily. Question is, are you—" Clara thought of the cabin in the meadow, beautiful but empty. She thought of her room in Jesse's house, warm and lived in, close to this man who was becoming essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Yes," she said simply, "I am." Outside, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: horses to train, chores to complete, perhaps more letters from town with news of Mrs. Morrison's latest machinations. But tonight, in the lamplight of a simple kitchen, Clara Thornton and Jesse McRae were writing their own story, one careful, honest page at a time. The storm rolled in from the mountains just after sunset, bringing with it the kind of rain that turned dust to mud and made the roof sing. Clara had seen it building all afternoon, dark clouds piling up against the peaks like a gathering army. She'd helped Jesse secure the horses and check the outbuildings, working with the practiced efficiency they'd developed over the past 6 weeks. Now, with the evening chores done and supper cleared away, she sat by the fire mending a torn shirt while Jesse worked on his account books at the table. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on her how natural it had become. Sharing these quiet evening hours, the only sounds were the scratch of his pen, the pop of burning wood, and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. A sudden crack of thunder made her jump, the needle pricking her finger. "Oh!" She brought the finger to her mouth instinctively. Jesse looked up immediately. "All right." "Fine, just clumsy." She showed him the tiny wound. "The storm's getting worse." As if to emphasize her point, another roll of thunder shook the house, followed by a flash of lightning that illuminated the windows like daylight. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house with a sound like grieving. Jesse set down his pen, frowning. "Haven't seen a storm like this since—" A sharp knock at the door cut him off. They both froze, looking at each other. Visitors were rare at the ranch, especially after dark. In weather like this, it could only mean trouble. Jesse rose, reaching for the rifle that hung by the door. "Stay back," he murmured to Clara, then called out, "Who's there?" "Jesse McRae." The voice was muffled by rain and wind. "It's Mayor Morrison and Reverend Walsh. We need to speak with you." Clara felt her stomach drop. Jesse's jaw tightened, but he set the rifle aside and opened the door. Mayor Morrison stood on the porch, water streaming from his expensive coat. Beside him, Reverend Walsh clutched his hat with both hands, looking deeply uncomfortable. Behind them, Clara could make out the shapes of several other men, their faces obscured by the storm. "Gentlemen," Jesse said evenly. "Strange night for a social call." "This isn't a social call," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the same imperious tone as his wife's. "May we come in? What we have to say shouldn't be discussed in the rain." Jesse stood aside reluctantly. Morrison entered first, his eyes immediately finding Clara by the fireplace. His expression hardened. The Reverend followed. Then 2 other men Clara recognized from town, Mr. Hartwell, who owned the bank, and Dr. Pritchard. "Miss Thornton," Morrison said, the words dripping disdain. "Still here, I see. Is there a problem? Gentlemen?" Jesse moved to stand between Clara and the visitors, a subtle but clear protective gesture. Morrison pulled a folded paper from his coat. "We're here on behalf of the Dry Valley Town Council and concerned citizens. This is a formal notice requiring Miss Thornton to leave the territory within 48 hours. "On what grounds?" Jesse's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Moral turpitude," Morrison replied. "Her presence here, unchaperoned and unmarried, is a corruption of public decency. Furthermore, there are questions about her past in New Orleans that suggest she may be a woman of questionable character." Clara stood, her mending falling to the floor. "How dare you?" "We have written testimony," Morrison continued, ignoring her, "from a traveling salesman who claims to have known you in New Orleans. Says you worked in establishments of ill repute." "That's a lie." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "I worked as a seamstress and washerwoman. I cared for my sick mother." "Nevertheless," Morrison said smoothly, "the testimony stands, combined with your current arrangement here. It's clear you're a corrupting influence. We cannot allow such immorality to take root in our community." Reverend Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps if Miss Thornton were to repent publicly, seek forgiveness." "For what?" Jesse's voice cut like a blade. "For wearing practical boots, for taking honest work when offered, for having the audacity to survive without your approval." "For living in sin," Morrison snapped, his composure cracking. "My wife was right about her from the start. This woman is a threat to everything decent families have built here." The wind howled louder, rattling the windows. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room in stark relief. Clara saw Jesse's hands clench, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. "Get out," he said, each word precise as a bullet. "Get off my land before I forget myself." "You're making a mistake, McRae," Morrison warned. "Harbor this woman, and you'll face consequences too. Your contracts with the Army for horses, your credit at the bank, all of it can disappear." "Then let it disappear." Jesse stepped forward, and despite being outnumbered, there was something in his bearing that made the other men step back. "I've built this ranch with my own hands, my own sweat. If you think you can threaten me into abandoning my principles, you don't know me at all." Dr. Pritchard spoke up, his voice conciliatory. "Jesse, be reasonable. No one wants trouble. Simply send the woman away, and all this unpleasantness ends." "The only unpleasantness here is you 4 standing in my home, dripping on my floor, making accusations based on lies and gossip." Jesse moved to the door, opening it wide. Rain and wind swept in. "Leave, now!" Morrison's face was purple with rage. "This isn't over. That woman will leave this territory, one way or another." "The only way Clara leaves is if she chooses to," Jesse said. "And gentlemen, if any accidents befall her or this ranch, I'll know exactly where to look for answers. I trust I'm making myself clear." The threat hung in the air like lightning about to strike. Morrison sputtered, but Hartwell put a hand on his arm. "Come on, Charles. We've said our piece." They filed out into the storm, Morrison turning at the threshold for one last word. "You've chosen your side, McRae. Remember that when the consequences come." Jesse slammed the door behind them, throwing the bolt with unnecessary force. For a moment, he stood with his back to Clara, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. Then he turned, and she saw the concern in his eyes. "Clara, I'm sorry. I should have anticipated—" "Stop," she crossed to him, placing a hand on his arm. "This isn't your fault. It's mine for thinking I could escape my past, for believing I could build something new here." "Your past," Jessie covered her hand with his. Clara, whatever lies they're spreading. They're not all lies, she said quietly. I did work in places that weren't respectable. Not what they're implying, never that, but I cleaned rooms in hotels where decent women didn't go. I took in washing from anyone who could pay, even working women. When you're desperate. Jessie, you can't afford to be particular about where money comes from. She waited for his expression to change, for the warmth in his eyes to cool. Instead, his hand tightened on hers. You survived, he said simply. You did what you had to do to take care of your mother and yourself. There's no shame in that. Mrs. Morrison would disagree. Mrs. Morrison has never missed a meal in her life or wondered how she'd pay for medicine. Jessie's voice was fierce. She judges from a throne built on her husband's money, looking down on anyone who's had to struggle. But Clara, I'd rather have one person who's known hardship and come through it with their kindness intact than a dozen pristine souls who've never been tested. The wind howled again, and suddenly the house felt very small, very isolated. Clara shivered, though the room was warm. They won't stop, she said. Morrison meant what he said about consequences. I can't let you lose everything you've built because of me. And I can't let them drive you away with lies and threats. Jessie guided her to the sofa by the fire. Sit, please. She sat, and he joined her, careful to maintain proper distance even now. The fire crackled between them and the storm. I need to tell you something, Jessie said, staring into the flames, about why I left Texas, why I came here to build this ranch alone. Clara waited, sensing the importance of what was coming. I was engaged once, back in Houston. Sarah was her name. Beautiful, accomplished, everything a man could want. Her father owned half the county. I was young, ambitious, thought I'd won the world. He paused, his profile etched sharp in the firelight. Then I found out her father's wealth came from things I couldn't stomach, shady deals, forced foreclosures. A man who'd take a widow's last acre without blinking. When I refused to join the family business, Sarah chose her comfortable life over me, said I was a fool to value principles over prosperity. Jessie. I left Texas with nothing but my horse and what I could carry, started over here, built this place board by board, and I swore I'd never again compromise what I knew was right for the sake of appearances or acceptance. He turned to her then, his eyes intense. So, when I tell you that Morrison and his threats don't matter to me, I mean it. I've lost everything before and survived. But I won't lose my integrity, and I won't stand by while they persecute someone whose only crime is refusing to fit their narrow mold. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't deserve... Don't. His voice was gentle but firm. Don't let them make you believe you deserve less because of where you've been or what you've had to do. You're worth more than all their propriety combined. The storm reached its crescendo then, thunder and lightning simultaneous, the very air electric with charge. In that moment of nature's fury, Clara made her choice. Then I'll stay, she said, if you're certain. I've never been more certain of anything. They sat in silence as the storm began to pass, the rain softening from assault to whisper. Clara thought of Morrison's threats, of the battles surely to come. But here, in this simple room with this complicated man, she felt safer than she had in years. Jessie, she said eventually, thank you for defending me, for seeing me as I am, not as they want to paint me. No thanks needed, he replied. Though, Clara, we should be prepared. Morrison doesn't make idle threats. Things may get difficult. More difficult than being auctioned like livestock, more difficult than being accused of theft. She managed a small smile. I think we can handle whatever comes. Jessie smiled back, and for a moment, the warmth in his eyes drove away all thought of storms and threats. I believe you're right, though maybe tomorrow we should ride to the county seat, file some legal papers, make sure everything's documented properly. What kind of papers? Employment contracts, witness statements, anything that establishes a legal record of your position here. He hesitated. And maybe we should think about that cabin in the meadow. Having your own established residence might—
Jesse,
Clara interrupted softly. We both know moving me to that cabin won't stop their gossip. They'll say what they want regardless. So maybe we should stop trying to appease people who'll never be satisfied and just live, honestly, as we see fit. The suggestion hung between them, weighted with possibility. Outside, the storm was moving on, thunder growing distant, but inside, another kind of electricity lingered. You're right, Jesse said finally. Though I still want those legal protections in place. Morrison's the type to use the law as a weapon when gossip fails. Then we'll go tomorrow. Clara stood, suddenly exhausted by the evening's events. But tonight, I think we've both earned some rest. Jesse rose as well, banking the fire. Clara, whatever comes, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this anymore. The simple promise, made without fanfare or flowery words, meant more than any grand declaration could have. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice, and made her way to her room. But sleep was long in coming. She lay in the darkness, listening to the last of the rain on the roof, thinking of Jesse's fierce defense, of his own story of choosing principle over comfort. Tomorrow would bring new challenges Morrison wouldn't give up easily. But tonight, she had something she'd never expected to find in this harsh territory, a partner. Someone who saw her truly and stood beside her anyway. Her boots sat by the door, still damp from the evening's work, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Clara smiled in the darkness. Let Morrison and his counsel do their worst. She'd walked through worse storms than this, and now she no longer walked alone. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the main room of Jesse's house. Clara sat curled in the corner of the worn leather sofa, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Across from her, Jesse occupied his usual chair, but tonight there was no pretense of reading or working on accounts. The confrontation with Morrison and his delegation had left them both too restless for ordinary evening pursuits. My mother used to say that sharing stories in firelight was how people truly came to know each other, Clara said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had stretched between them. She believed darkness made truth easier to speak. Jesse shifted in his chair, his face half lit by the dying flames. Wise woman, your mother, though I reckon you inherited that wisdom. Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of all this. Clara gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the situation, everything that had led her to this moment. She wanted so much more from me than washing strangers' clothes and fighting for the right to wear sensible boots. Tell me about her, Jesse said, if you want to. Clara took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound was lonely, but somehow comforting wild things calling to their own kind. Mama was beautiful, she began. Not just in looks, though she turned heads even in her final years, but she had this light about her, this way of making any room brighter just by entering it. She could play piano like angels were guiding her fingers, and when she sang, Clara smiled at the memory. Even the roughest men would stop to listen when Lillian Thornton sang. I remember, Jesse said quietly. At the riverside, she'd play these pieces that made you forget you were in a dusty hotel in Missouri, made you think of better places, better times. That was her gift. She could transport people. Clara's smile turned bittersweet. She married my father against her family's wishes. He was a clerk, decent but poor, and her parents had grander ambitions. They disowned her when she chose love over money. Did she ever regret it? Never, not even after Papa died of fever and left us with nothing but debt. She'd say, Clara May, 5 years of real love is worth 50 years of comfortable emptiness. Clara set down her cup, drawing her knees up to her chest. She worked herself to death trying to keep us afloat. Piano lessons for pennies, taking in sewing, playing in hotels that grew seedier as her health failed. And through it all, she kept telling me I was meant for better things. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Jesse rose to add another log, the action giving them both a moment to compose themselves. "What about your father?" Clara asked when he'd settled back in his chair. "You mentioned your mother, but—" "Seamus McRae was a hard man," Jesse said after a pause. "Not cruel, but distant. He'd come from Ireland during the famine, carved out a small ranch in Texas through pure stubbornness, worked from dawn to dusk every day of his life, expected the same from his sons. Sons, you have brothers." "Had 2 older brothers, both killed in the war." Jesse's voice was carefully neutral, but Clara could hear the old pain beneath. "Patrick died at Antietam, Michael at Chancellorsville. I was too young to enlist. Thank God, though I wanted to follow them. Thought it was glorious. Stupid boy that I was." "I'm sorry." "Long time ago now, but it broke something in my father. He'd built everything for his sons to inherit, and suddenly I was all that was left, the disappointment of the litter, the one who preferred books to branding." Jesse's smile held no humor. "He died 2 years after the war ended. Think he just decided there was no point in going on." "And your mother? She lasted another 5 years, tough as boot leather. Like I said, ran the ranch herself until I was old enough to take over or sell out." He met Clara's eyes across the flickering light. "I sold it. Used the money to start fresh here, where nobody knew the McRae name or its ghosts." "Do you regret leaving?" Jesse considered the question. "I regret that I couldn't be what my father wanted. But no, I don't regret choosing my own path. This land, this life, it's mine in a way Texas never was." They fell quiet again, but it was a different silence now, weighted with shared understanding. 2 people who'd lost much but refused to be defined by their losses. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said eventually. "That woman you mentioned, Sarah, did you love her?" Jesse's expression grew thoughtful. "I thought I did, but looking back, I think I loved the idea of her more than the woman herself. She was everything I'd been taught to want beautiful, accomplished, from a good family. It never occurred to me to ask if we actually suited each other beyond the surface. And when she chose security over you, it hurt," Jesse admitted. "But it also freed me, made me realize I'd been trying to live up to other people's expectations just as much as she was." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's why what they're doing to you makes me so angry. Clara, this need to force people into acceptable shapes. Regardless of who they really are, I've seen what it costs." Clara uncurled from the sofa, moving to sit on the hearthrug closer to the fire. The warmth felt good against her skin, chasing away the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish," she said, staring into the flames. "Staying here, potentially costing you business and standing in the community. Maybe I should—" "Don't!" Jesse's voice was firm. "Don't let them make you responsible for their small-mindedness." "But if Morrison follows through on his threats, then I'll deal with the consequences. Clara, look at me." She turned from the fire to meet his gaze. "I've lived by other people's rules. I've tried to fit into spaces that weren't made for me. All it brought was misery and false relationships. What we have here, this honesty, this partnership, it's worth more than any contract Morrison could threaten." "Partnership," Clara repeated softly. "Is that what we have?" The question hung between them like a held breath. Jesse rose from his chair, moving to sit on the floor beside her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth competing with the fire's. "I suppose that depends," he said carefully, "on what we want it to be." Clara's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you want, Jesse?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. I want Sunday mornings listening to you hum in the kitchen. I want evenings like this, sharing stories by firelight. I want to teach you everything I know about horses and learn everything you know about, well, everything else." He paused, gathering courage. "I want to know what it's like to not be alone anymore, and to make sure you never are again either." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Jesse." "I know it's complicated," he continued quickly. "I know what people would say, what they already say, and I know you've been hurt by people claiming to care for you. But Clara, She stopped him by placing her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "I know," she said softly. "I know what you're trying to say. And Jesse, I want those things too. Have wanted them for weeks now, even though I tried to tell myself otherwise." His hand turned beneath hers, fingers interlacing. "Where does that leave us?" "Honestly, I'm not sure." Clara looked at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. That is, after watching what Mama went through. I swore I'd never let myself be vulnerable to anyone, but you make me want to break that promise to myself." "I'd never ask you to be vulnerable," Jesse said. "Partners stand together, equal in strength. That's what I'm offering, not protection, not charity, but partnership. In everything. Even if it costs you, especially then." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Clara, I've built a successful ranch. I have respect in the territory, money in the bank, but none of it means anything if I have to compromise who I am to keep it. And who I am is a man who sees your worth and refuses to pretend otherwise." Clara turned to face him fully, their knees almost touching, in the firelight. His eyes were more green than gray, flecked with gold like hidden treasure. "My mother used to say that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice you made every day. To see someone clearly and choose them anyway, flaws and all." "Your mother was a wise woman," Jesse said softly. "Though I'm still looking for these flaws she mentioned." That surprised a laugh from Clara. "Oh, I have them. I'm stubborn, too proud sometimes. I hold grudges longer than I should, and I've been told I'm entirely too forthright for a proper lady." "Good thing I'm not looking for a proper lady, then." Jesse's free hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch feather-light. "I'm looking for a partner who can match me strength for strength, who won't let me get away with foolishness, who sees the world clear-eyed but still finds reasons to hope." "And if I'm looking for the same—" "Then maybe we've both found what we're looking for." The coyotes called again in the distance, and the fire settled lower in the grate. Clara knew she should pull away, return to the safety of careful distance, but sitting here with Jesse, hands linked and hearts finally open, she couldn't remember why distance had seemed so important. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you, but of hoping for something that could be taken away. Every good thing in my life has come with a price." "I'm scared too," Jesse confessed. "Scared of not being enough, of failing you the way I've failed others. But Clara, isn't that fear worth facing if it means we don't have to face it alone?" She thought of her mother's words, about 5 years of real love being worth 50 of comfortable emptiness, thought of all the careful walls she'd built around her heart, and how Jesse had somehow walked through them without her even noticing until it was too late. "Yes," she whispered, "it's worth it." Jesse's hand tightened on hers, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her, but he simply raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both courtly and intimate. "Then we face tomorrow together," he said. "Whatever Morrison brings, whatever the town says, we stand together. Agreed?" "Agreed." Clara squeezed his hand once more before reluctantly pulling away. "Though I should probably get some sleep if we're riding to the county seat tomorrow." Jesse stood, offering her a hand up. "Clara, thank you for trusting me with your story, for listening to mine. Thank you for seeing me," she replied. "Really seeing me, not just what others project onto me." They stood facing each other in the dying firelight, a new understanding between them. Not quite lovers, More than friends, something uniquely their own, forged in honesty and tempered by adversity. "Good night, Jesse," Clara said softly. "Good night, Clara. Sweet dreams." As she made her way to her room, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. The world outside might be full of Morrison's threats and society's judgment, but inside this house, she'd found something worth fighting for: partnership, understanding, and maybe, if they were brave enough, love. Her boots stood ready by the door, and tomorrow they'd carry her to the county seat to establish legal protections. But tonight, for the first time since her mother's death, Clara Thornton went to sleep feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the McRae ranch, frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Clara stood at her bedroom window, fully dressed, watching Jesse lead the horses from the barn. They'd planned to leave early for the county seat, wanting to complete their business before the day grew hot. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the conversation by the fire, the memory of Jesse's hand in hers, the quiet intensity in his voice as he spoke of partnership. It all felt dreamlike in the morning light. But the small wildflower he'd left by her door, still damp with dew, proved it had been real. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Clara, coffee's ready when you are." She found Jesse in the kitchen, looking unusually formal in a clean white shirt and string tie. He'd shaved carefully, she noticed, and made an effort to tame his usually unruly hair. "You look—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "Professional." A slight smile touched his lips. "Figure if we're dealing with legal matters, might as well look the part." "You look lovely." Clara glanced down at her best dress, a deep green wool she'd saved for special occasions. "Thank you, though I'm still wearing these." She lifted her hem slightly to show her boots. "Wouldn't have you any other way." They ate a quick breakfast of biscuits and jam, the ease between them both familiar and newly charged with awareness. Every accidental brush of hands as they cleared the table, every shared glance, carried weight it hadn't before. "Ready?" Jesse asked, helping her with her coat. "As I'll ever be." The ride to Laramie took 3 hours, the trail winding through valleys beginning to show autumn color. They talked easily of ranch matters, upcoming horse sales, plans for winter preparations. But underneath ran a current of anticipation, not just for the legal protections they sought, but for this rare day together away from familiar territory. Laramie bustled with activity, a proper town compared to Dry Valley. The streets teemed with freight wagons, cowboys, merchants, and even a few ladies in fashionable dress who eyed Clara's boots with disapproval. "Let them look," Jesse murmured, guiding her toward a building marked Harrison and Associates, attorneys at law. Mr. Harrison proved to be a thin, precise man with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles. He listened carefully as Jesse explained their situation, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions. "So, Miss Thornton is your employee, working as housekeeper and assistant with the horses?" "That's correct," Jesse confirmed. "I want everything properly documented: employment contract, living arrangements, wages, all above board and legally binding." Harrison's pen scratched across paper. "And the threats from this Mayor Morrison," Clara spoke up. "He's trying to force me from the territory based on false accusations and impropriety." "Impropriety." Harrison's tone was dry. "Because you live on Mr. McRae's property while employed there." "Essentially, yes." "I see." The lawyer set down his pen. "Mr. McRae, Miss Thornton, I'll be frank. The law is on your side. A woman has every right to honest employment, and there's nothing illegal about living on the property where she works. Many housekeepers do exactly that." "But," Jesse prompted, "but the law and public opinion often diverge. While I can draw up documents that protect Miss Thornton's legal right to employment and residence, I cannot protect either of you from social consequences." "We understand," Clara said firmly. We just want to ensure that Morrison can't use the law as a weapon." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Smart. I'll draft a comprehensive employment agreement, sworn affidavits regarding the nature of the arrangement, and a cease and desist letter to Mayor Morrison warning against further harassment or defamation. Will that suit?" "Perfectly," Jesse agreed. While Harrison worked, they walked through Laramie's commercial district. Jesse insisted on buying Clara new work gloves and a warm scarf for the coming winter, waving away her protests about the expense. "Consider it a business investment," he said. "Can't have my best horse trainer getting frostbite." They stopped for lunch at a small cafe, sitting by the window watching the world pass by. It felt dangerously like courtship, this public meal together, and Clara saw several matrons whispering behind their hands. "Does it bother you?" she asked. The stares, the gossip. Jesse followed her gaze to a particularly disapproving woman. "Used to," but then I realized something people who are happy with their own lives don't spend so much time judging others. It's the miserable ones who need to tear others down to feel better. Speaking from experience. Maybe. He pushed the last piece of pie toward her. "After Sarah, I was the subject of gossip for months. Poor Jesse McRae. Thrown over for a richer man. Some pitied me. Some said I'd gotten what I deserved for reaching above my station. Eventually, I stopped caring what any of them thought. And now I'm having lunch with a remarkable woman who's brave enough to be herself in a world that demands conformity. Let them stare." Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Careful, Mr. McRae. Keep talking like that and people will think you're courting me." "Would that be such a bad thing?" The question was light, but his eyes were serious. Before Clara could answer, a commotion in the street drew their attention. A young woman, barely more than a girl, was struggling with a man who appeared to be drunk. He had her by the wrist, trying to drag her toward the saloon district. Jesse was on his feet immediately. "Stay here." But Clara followed, unwilling to be a passive observer. By the time they reached the street, Jesse had separated the man from the girl, placing himself between them. "I believe the lady said no," Jesse said calmly. "Lady," the drunk laughed harshly. "She ain't no lady. Works at the dollar, don't you? Sweetheart, just being friendly like." The girl, she couldn't be more than 17, wrapped her arms around herself, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I just wanted to buy flour. I wasn't looking for trouble." "Trouble finds your kind," the man sneered, lunging forward. Jesse caught him easily, spinning him around and marching him several steps away. "Walk away now, or I'll help you along. Your choice." Something in Jesse's stance must have penetrated the man's drunk haze. He stumbled off, muttering curses. Jesse returned to where Clara had moved to comfort the girl. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "Most folks wouldn't." "Are you hurt?" Clara asked gently. "No, ma'am, just scared." The girl noticed Clara's boots and her eyes widened slightly. You're the one from Dry Valley, the one who stood up to the mayor's wife." Clara blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "Word travels. Some of us. Well, we heard about what you said. About a woman's worth not being in her clothes, but her character." The girl straightened slightly. It meant something, hearing that. "What's your name?" Clara asked. Martha Jennings." She glanced nervously at the saloon district. "I should go. If I'm late, they'll dock my pay." "Wait." Clara opened her purse, pressing a few coins into the girl's hand. "For the flour. And Martha, if you ever need help, real help, send word to the McRae Ranch. We'll come." Martha's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Why would you?" "Because someone should have helped me once, and didn't." Clara said simply, "Don't let anyone make you believe you deserve less because of how you survive." After Martha hurried away, Clara found Jesse watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Just when I think I know you, Clara Thornton, you show me new depths. He offered his arm. Come on, Harrison should have those papers ready. The ride home was quieter, both lost in thought. Clara kept thinking about Martha, about all the women forced into impossible choices by circumstance. Jesse seemed preoccupied too, though she couldn't guess his thoughts. As they neared the ranch, Jesse suddenly reined in his horse. Clara, I need to say something. She stopped beside him, worry flickering through her. What is it? Today, watching you with that girl, seeing how you didn't hesitate to help. He paused, seeming to struggle for words. I've been trying to court you properly, carefully, trying to give you time and space. But I realize now that's just another form of conforming to what others expect. Jesse, let me finish. He turned in his saddle to face her fully. I'm not a perfect man. I'm stubborn, too used to my own company, probably set in my ways. But I'm also a man who knows what he wants. And what I want is you. Not as my housekeeper or employee, but as my partner in truth, my equal, Your what? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. My wife, if you'll have me. The words hung between them like suspended stars. I know it's too soon by society's standards. I know what people will say. But Clara, I also know that I love you. Have loved you since you stood on that auction block with your chin high and your spirit unbroken. Maybe even since I heard your name and remembered a kind woman who played piano for a lonely boy. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. Jesse, You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. Needed to stop pretending this was just about protection or employment. Whatever you decide, the offer stands. But I wanted you to know all of what you'd be deciding. She nudged Sage closer until their knees touched. Reaching out, she took Jesse's face in her hands, feeling the slight roughness of stubble, the warmth of his skin. You impossible man, she murmured. I was trying so hard to be sensible, to not assume, to protect myself from wanting too much. And now I think my mother was right. 5 years of real love is worth 50 of comfortable emptiness. She leaned closer. I love you too, Jesse McRae, despite my better judgment and completely against my plans. His smile was like sunrise. Is that a yes? Ask me properly when we're home, she said, surprising herself with the word. Home. When had the ranch become home? But Jesse, the answer will be yes. He caught one of her hands, pressing it to his lips. Then let's go home. Clara Thornton, we have a future to plan. They rode the last miles in companionable silence, hands occasionally touching across the space between horses. Behind them, Laramie held legal protections and the memory of a girl named Martha who'd found hope in Clara's story. Ahead waited their ranch, their life, their choice to build something together regardless of what the world might say. As they crested the final hill and saw the buildings spread below, Clara felt a fierce joy rise in her chest. Tomorrow would bring its challenges: Morrison's anger, society's judgment, all the difficulties of two strong-willed people learning to share a life. But tonight, she would cook dinner in her kitchen while Jesse did evening chores. They would sit by the fire and talk of everything and nothing. And at some point, he would ask her properly, and she would say yes to a future she'd never dared imagine. Her boots had carried her so far from grief to hope, from conformity to authenticity, from solitude to partnership. Now they would carry her forward into whatever came next, side by side with a man who saw her truly and loved her anyway. The sun was setting as they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Jesse helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. Welcome home, Clara, he said softly. Home, she repeated, tasting the word like honey. Yes, I believe it is. The market square in Dry Valley buzzed with its usual Saturday morning activity, but Clara could feel the shift in atmosphere the moment she and Jesse arrived. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, heads turned. Whispers followed in their wake like dust devils. It was their first trip to town together since the night Morrison and his delegation had visited the ranch 2 weeks ago. They'd needed supplies: flour, coffee, winter goods, and Clara had insisted on coming despite Jesse's concerns. "Let them look," she'd said that morning, lacing up her boots with determined fingers. "I won't be driven into hiding by their disapproval." Now, standing in the general store while Mr. Peterson wrapped their purchases with obvious reluctance, she held her head high even as she felt the weight of every stare. "That'll be $12, Peterson said, not meeting their eyes. Jesse paid without comment, but Clara noticed the price was higher than it should be. The Morrison influence, no doubt, adding its tax to their simple transaction. As they loaded the wagon, a small voice called out, "Miss Clara!" Clara turned to see young Emma Hartwell, the banker's daughter, running toward them. The girl was about 10, with bright eyes and ribbons in her hair that were coming undone. "Emma," her mother's sharp voice cracked like a whip. "Come here this instant." But Emma had already reached Clara, slightly out of breath. "Miss Clara, I wanted to tell you I think your boots are splendid. Mama makes me wear these silly slippers that pinch, but yours look like you could climb mountains." Emma Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell had arrived, face flushed with mortification. She grabbed her daughter's arm. "We do not speak to what, Mrs. Hartwell?" Clara asked quietly. "To women who work for their living, to people who refuse to pretend to be something they're not." "Mrs." Hartwell's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Around them, Clara could see other townspeople gathering, drawn by the prospect of drama. "Mama says you're a bad influence," Emma piped up with the devastating honesty of children. "But I don't see how—" "You're kind to horses and you helped Martha Jennings when that mean man was bothering her. That's what the Bible says to do. Isn't it help people?" "Enough, Mrs." Hartwell dragged Emma away, but not before the girl called back. "I'm going to get boots like yours when I'm grown." A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the crowd. Clara felt Jesse's hand at her elbow, steady and reassuring. "Well," said a clear voice from the crowd, "seems the child has more Christian sense than the adults." Rosalie stepped forward from her eatery, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked older, Clara thought, more worn than when they'd first met. But there was something determined in her expression. "Rosalie," someone hissed, "what are you doing?" "What I should have done weeks ago." She walked directly to Clara. "Miss Thornton, I owe you an apology. I let fear of Morrison and his wife keep me from doing what was right. I am ashamed of that." "Hey, Mrs. Morrison won't like this," another woman warned. "Mrs. Morrison isn't my conscience," Rosalie replied. She turned back to Clara. "I hear you make the best cornbread in the territory. I'd be honored if you'd share the recipe, perhaps over coffee at my place." Clara felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I'd like that very much." "This is a mistake, Rosalie," Mrs. Peterson said coldly. "You'll lose customers." "Then I'll lose the kind of customers I don't want anyway." Rosalie straightened her shoulders. "I've been in this town 15 years, built my business honest, treated people fair. If that's not enough to earn me the right to choose my own friends, then what's the point?" A murmur ran through the crowd, surprise, disapproval, but also, Clara noticed, a thread of something else, admiration, envy on the edges. She saw other women exchanging glances, as if Rosalie's defiance had stirred something they'd long suppressed. "Ladies," Jesse spoke for the first time, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "Gentlemen, I've kept my peace while you've gossiped and threatened and tried to run off a good woman for the crime of not fitting your narrow mold. But I'll say this once, so there's no misunderstanding." He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. "Clara Thornton is the finest person I know. She works harder than any two men, treats every living creature with kindness, and faces your judgment with more grace than you deserve. I'm proud to stand beside her, And any of you who can't accept that are welcome to take your business elsewhere. You'd choose her over the town? Morrison's voice cut through the crowd as he pushed forward, his face mottled with anger. Over the contracts, the connections, everything you've built. I'd choose what's right over what's profitable any day. Jesse replied, Something you might try. Morrison. Morrison's face darkened further. You'll regret this, McRae. Both of you will. The only thing I regret, Clara said, finding her voice at last, is letting your small-mindedness silence me for so long. She looked around at the gathered crowd, meeting as many eyes as would hold her gaze. I came to this town seeking honest work and a new beginning. What I found was judgment, cruelty, and people so afraid of difference they'd auction off a woman's dignity for entertainment. She paused, seeing some faces flush with shame at the reminder. But I also found kindness in unexpected places. Tom Hennessy, who gave me work when no one else would. Jesse, who saw my worth when you saw only scandal. And now Rosalie, brave enough to extend friendship despite the cost. Pretty words. Mrs. Morrison had appeared at her husband's side, lips pursed in familiar disapproval. But they don't change what you are, a woman who wears men's clothing, who lives unwed with a man, who corrupts young girls with ideas above their station. A woman who survived. Clara cut her off, stepping forward. A woman who chose practical footwear over pretty suffering. A woman who took honest work and gave honest labor in return. If that threatens you so deeply, perhaps you should examine why. She turned to address the crowd once more. I'll be in town next Saturday, same as today. I'll shop at the stores that will have me, speak to anyone who wishes to speak to me, and continue living according to my own conscience rather than your fears. You can gossip all you like. You can threaten and shun and whisper behind your hands, but you cannot make me less than I am. And she won't be alone, Jesse added, taking Clara's hand in full view of everyone. I've already spoken to Judge Howard. Clara and I will be married at the courthouse in Laramie within the month. Any of you who wish to attend are welcome. Any who don't can keep their opinions to themselves. The announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd. Marriage, not just employment or protection, but marriage. The ultimate declaration that Jesse McRae, respected rancher and horseman, had chosen Clara Thornton and all she represented. You can't, Mrs. Morrison sputtered. It's love, Jesse said simply. Something I doubt you'd recognize, given how much hate you carry. Before anyone could respond, Tom Hennessy pushed through the crowd, leading Clara's horse Sage, now fully trained and gleaming with health. Thought you might want to see how she turned out, he said gruffly. Finest animal I've seen in years. You did good work with her, Miss Clara. Thank you, Tom. He nodded, then raised his voice. For what it's worth, I'll be at that wedding. Any man or woman with sense can see these two belong together. And Morrison, you threaten my friends again. You'll answer to me. And me, Rosalie added. And us, came a voice from the back. Martha Jennings stepped forward, accompanied by two other young women. Miss Clara showed me kindness when everyone else saw worthlessness. We'll stand with her. One by one, others began to declare themselves. Not many, most of the crowd remained silent or hostile, but enough. The minister's wife, who'd quietly disagreed with Mrs. Morrison's methods, the blacksmith, who respected Jesse's integrity, a handful of ranch wives who'd grown tired of the town's suffocating propriety. Morrison looked around, calculating the shift in dynamics. He'd expected unified opposition, not this fracturing of his support. This isn't over, he said finally. The bank still holds notes on several of your properties. Don't think I won't. Actually, a new voice interrupted. A well-dressed man stepped from the crowd. Mr. Garrison from the Territorial Bank in Laramie. I think you'll find those notes have been purchased. Mr. McRae arranged it last week. Seems he anticipated your threats. Jesse smiled grimly. Like I said, Morrison, I choose what's right over what's profitable. But I'm not a fool. Clara looked up at him, this man who'd quietly moved to protect not just her but their allies. You bought their debts. Insurance, he said. Nobody should lose their livelihood for showing basic human decency. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in small groups. The neat lines of social order thoroughly disrupted. Morrison stalked away, his wife beside him, both radiating fury. But their power had cracked, and everyone had seen it. As Clara and Jessie prepared to leave, Rosalie touched Clara's arm. That invitation for coffee, I meant it, next Saturday. I'll be here, Clara promised. Emma Hartwell broke free from her mother once more, pressing something into Clara's hand before being dragged away. It was a small drawing, a figure clearly meant to be Clara, wearing boots and standing tall, with "My Hero" written in a child's careful script beneath. Ready to go home? Jessie asked softly. Clara looked around the square once more. It wasn't the acceptance she'd hoped for when she'd first arrived in Dry Valley, but it was something a crack in the wall of judgment, a handful of people willing to think beyond their prejudices. Yes, she said, climbing onto the wagon seat. Let's go home. As they rolled out of town, Clara held Emma's drawing carefully, behind them. The town would buzz with gossip for days. Some would celebrate Morrison's small defeat. Others would rally to his side. The battle for Dry Valley's soul was far from over. But Clara had learned something important today. She didn't need the whole town's approval. She needed only the courage to stand for what was right, and the support of those who mattered. The rest would come in time. Or it wouldn't. Either way, she would continue being exactly who she was, boots, independence, and all. Thank you, she said to Jessie as the town disappeared behind them. For the banknotes, for standing with me, for loving you, Jessie completed. That's the easiest thing I've ever done. Clara, the rest is just details. She leaned against his shoulder as he drove, Emma's drawing clutched in her hands. Somewhere in Dry Valley, a little girl was dreaming of boots and freedom. Women were questioning the rules that bound them. And Clara Thornton, who'd arrived with nothing but grief and determination, had planted seeds of change simply by refusing to be anything less than herself. The road home stretched before them, golden in the afternoon light. In a month, she'd be Clara McRae, but the boots would remain, and so would her spirit. Morrison and his allies might scheme and threaten, but they'd already lost the most important battle, the one for unquestioned authority over others' lives. Change was coming to Dry Valley, one cracked prejudice at a time, and it wore sensible boots. The morning dawned crystal clear over the Wyoming territory, the kind of day that made the sky seem endless and full of possibility. Clara stood before the mirror in her room at Jessie's ranch, smoothing down the skirt of her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in soft blue wool that Rosalie had helped her make. You look beautiful, Jessie's voice came from the doorway. Clara turned, mock scolding. It's bad luck to see the bride before... She stopped, taking in his appearance. He wore a new black suit, his unruly hair tamed, boots polished to a shine. You clean up well, Mr. McRae. Had to make an effort. Not every day a man marries the bravest woman in the territory. He crossed to her, taking her hands. Last chance to change your mind. You could still run. Take Sage and head for California. Start fresh without all this trouble. Clara squeezed his hands. Jessie McRae, I've run toward many things in my life, but never away from them. I'm not starting now. Even knowing what we're riding into, they both understood the weight of the question. The past month had seen the divide in Dry Valley deepen. Morrison's faction remained hostile, but their opposition had found its voice. More women had started wearing practical clothing. Young Emma Hartwell had convinced 3 of her friends to petition their parents for boots like Miss Clara's. The old order was cracking, and Morrison blamed Clara for every fracture. Especially knowing, Clara said firmly. She glanced down at her feet, where her faithful boots peeked out beneath her wedding dress. These boots have carried me through worse. They'll carry me through whatever comes next." Jessie smiled, lifting her hand to kiss it gently. "Then let's go get married." The ride to the courthouse in Laramie took on an almost ceremonial quality. Tom Hennessy drove the lead wagon, with Clara and Jessie seated together behind him. Following them came a small but determined procession, Rosalie in her Sunday best, Martha Jennings and her friends, the blacksmith and his wife, even the minister's wife who'd finally found the courage to defy Mrs. Morrison openly. As they neared the town, riders appeared on the horizon. Clara tensed, but Jessie laid a calming hand on hers. "That's Will Garrett," he said, recognizing Tom's nephew. "And he's not alone." Indeed, as the riders drew closer, Clara saw they were ranchers from the outlying areas, men and women who'd heard the story of the auction, of Jessie's stand, of a woman who refused to bow to the town's narrow expectations. They'd come to witness, to support, to declare their own independence from Morrison's petty tyranny. "Heard there was a wedding," called out Sam Winters, a rancher from the North Valley. "Figured it might need some extra witnesses." By the time they reached the courthouse, their small party had grown to nearly 30 people. Judge Howard waited on the steps, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. "Quite a gathering for a simple civil ceremony," he observed. "Nothing simple about it, Judge," Jessie replied, helping Clara down from the wagon. "We're making a statement as much as a marriage." "Good," Judge Howard said. "About time someone did." Inside the courthouse, Clara felt a moment of vertigo. Everything had happened so fast from that humiliating day on the auction block to this moment, preparing to bind her life to Jessie's. But then she caught sight of their reflection in a window, Jessie tall and steady beside her, her own face glowing with certainty, and knew this was right. "Do you have the ring?" Judge Howard asked. Jessie produced a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he told Clara quietly. "One of the few things I kept, but if you'd prefer something new—" "It's perfect," Clara interrupted, touched by the gesture. The ceremony itself was brief, the legal minimum required by the territory, but when Judge Howard asked if anyone objected, Tom Hennessy spoke up. "I object to it being so short," he said gruffly. "These two deserve better than rushed words. They deserve to know what we all see." He stood, addressing the gathered witnesses. "I've known Jesse McRae 7 years. Never met a more honest man. Never seen him treat any creature with less than respect. And Clara Thornton. In the short time she's been here, she's shown more courage than most folks manage in a lifetime. If marriage is about choosing a partner to face the world with, I can't think of two people better matched." Here, Rosalie added, dabbing at her eyes. "Clara came to my establishment seeking work, and I turned her away out of fear. I'll regret that till my dying day, but she never held it against me, and when I finally found my backbone, she welcomed my friendship without hesitation. That's the kind of woman Jesse's marrying, one who meets cruelty with grace and kindness with an open heart." Martha Jennings stood next, voice trembling but determined. "Miss Clara saw me at my lowest and offered help without judgment. She and Mr. Jesse showed me that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. That's a lesson worth more than all Mrs. Morrison's propriety." One by one, others stood to speak. The blacksmith talked about Jesse's fairness in business. A ranch wife praised Clara's skill with horses. Even Judge Howard added his observations about their legal preparations, their determination to protect not just themselves, but others who might face similar persecution. By the time they returned to the actual vows, Clara's eyes were wet with tears. This wasn't the wedding she'd imagined as a girl, no church bells, no white dress, no approving family. But it was something better, a gathering of people who saw her truly and celebrated rather than condemned what they saw. "Clara May Thornton," Jessie said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "I take you as my wife, my equal, my partner. I promise to stand beside you against whatever storms come, to value your strength as much as your tenderness, to never ask you to be less than you are. Your courage humbles me. Your kindness gentles me, and your love completes me. From this day forward, you walk your path not alone, but with me beside you, step for step, come what may." Clara had to clear her throat before she could speak. "Jesse McRae, I came to this territory seeking work and found a home, seeking survival and found love. You saw me when others saw only scandal. You protected me while respecting my independence. You offered partnership when the world demanded submission. I take you as my husband, my equal, my friend. I promise to match your strength with mine, to share your burdens and multiply your joys, to build beside you a life based on truth rather than pretense. From this day forward, your path is mine, and mine is yours, and we walk them together. Then, by the authority vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, Judge Howard proclaimed, I declare you husband and wife, Mr. McRae. You may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, appropriate for public witness, but Clara felt the promise in it of passion carefully banked, of nights no longer spent in separate rooms, of a future written by their own hands. As they signed the register, making it legal, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, Clara could see a rider approaching fast one of Morrison's men. "Trouble," Tom muttered. But when the man burst in, he was grinning. "Morrison's gone packed up in the night, him and the missus both. Word is the territorial governor got wind of his threats against landowners, started asking questions about some questionable bank dealings. They lit out for parts unknown." A cheer went up from the assembled crowd. Without Morrison's money and influence, his supporters would quickly fade back into the general population, nursing their prejudices in private rather than wielding them as weapons. "Seems fitting," Jessie said, pulling Clara close. "A new start for everyone." Outside the courthouse, the wedding party had grown as word spread through Laramie. People who didn't even know them personally had come to witness this small revolution, a woman who wore boots to her wedding, a man who chose love over conformity, a community that decided judgment was less important than justice. "Where to now?" Clara asked as Jessie helped her onto the wagon. "Home," he said simply. "Our home." "Wait," a voice called from the crowd. Emma Hartwell pushed through, having somehow escaped her mother's supervision. "Miss Clara, Mrs. McRae, I brought you something." She thrust a package into Clara's hands, a pair of small, sturdy boots, clearly handmade. "Pa helped me," Emma said proudly. "He said if you could change things just by being yourself, maybe I could too. So I'm going to wear these and learn to ride, and maybe someday I'll have my own ranch." Clara hugged the girl tightly. "I believe you will. Emma, and when you do, you come find us. We'll teach you everything we know." As their procession wound its way back toward the ranch, Clara leaned against Jessie's shoulder, the simple gold ring catching the afternoon light. Behind them, Dry Valley would have to find a new balance without Morrison's heavy hand. Ahead, the ranch waited no longer. Jessie's alone, but theirs together. "Happy?" Jessie asked softly. Clara thought of her mother's words about not letting others cut you down to size. She'd kept that promise in ways Lillian Thornton could never have imagined, not by fighting to fit in, but by refusing to shrink herself to fit others' expectations. "Yes," she said, meaning it completely. Happy and grateful and ready for whatever comes next. Even if what comes next is learning to fix fences and birth calves. Especially then. She grinned up at him. "Though I'm keeping my boots for all of it." "I wouldn't have it any other way, Mrs. McRae." As they crested the hill that brought their ranch into view, the wedding party began to sing an old hymn about finding your way home. Clara joined in, her voice blending with the others as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. She'd started this journey with nothing but grief and a pair of practical boots. She'd found judgment and cruelty, but also unexpected kindness and courage in unlikely places. Most importantly, she'd found Jesse a man who saw her strength as something to celebrate rather than suppress. tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be those who thought a woman should stay in her prescribed place, who saw independence as threat rather than virtue. But tonight, Clara McRae would dance at her own wedding in her comfortable boots, surrounded by friends who'd chosen courage over conformity. And in the years to come, when young women in the territory spoke of Clara McRae, they wouldn't talk about scandal or shame. They'd talk about the woman who wore boots to her wedding and changed the world by refusing to apologize for who she was. They'd talk about the man who stood beside her, proving that real strength wasn't about dominance, but partnership. Most of all, they'd remember that sometimes the greatest rebellions start with the smallest acts, like choosing comfortable boots over painful propriety, or extending kindness to someone the world has deemed unworthy. In the end, Clara and Jesse's love story wasn't just about two people finding each other. It was about an entire community finding the courage to question why they'd always done things a certain way, and whether that way was worth preserving. As the ranch came into view, golden in the setting sun, Clara smiled. Her boots had carried her far indeed, from sorrow to joy, from isolation to community, from a woman alone to a wife surrounded by chosen family. And this, she knew, was only the beginning. Under the vast Wyoming sky, with her husband beside her and friends around her, Clara McRae was finally, completely, home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute? Relaxing at home? Or perhaps on a long drive? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic tales from the American frontier. If you enjoyed Clara and Jesse's journey, please hit that like button and consider clicking the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support helps keep these tales of courage, love, and independence alive. Until next time, partners.